Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to capture the essentials of an incredible historical sourcebook, iconic moments of the 60s, in exactly 8 minutes or less. We're breaking down a single decade defined by unparalleled contradictions, a time that was constantly balancing immense, soaring optimism with, well, true existential dread. Let's jump right in. How could a single 10-year span simultaneously bring humanity to the absolute brink of global nuclear destruction and yet propel us all the way to the surface of the moon? It's an incredibly dense, complex era, and as we look at the source material, we see a world fundamentally transforming on almost every single front. This decade was really defined by a stark dichotomy. On one side, you have the highest highs of social and scientific revolutions. Think monumental civil rights victories and those utopian ideals of peace and love. But on the flip side, this directly contrasts with the lowest lows of international conflict, escalating wars, and a string of tragic, high-profile losses that repeatedly shook the world to its core. It's like history was suddenly put on fast forward. We go from John F. Kennedy's narrow, unexpected victory in 1960 straight into the grim construction of the Berlin Wall in 61. We hit peak tension with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 62, achieve landmark legislative progress in 64, suffer the heartbreaking loss of Martin Luther King Jr. in 68, and then somehow we finish the decade with the Apollo 11 lunar landing in 1969. All of that in under 10 years. This era of contradictions really built up to the ultimate geopolitical tension. In October 1962, the United States discovered that the Soviet Union was constructing medium and intermediate-range missile bases right in Cuba, and these were capable of targeting American soil, including Washington, D.C. So the U.S. and Soviet Union engaged in a terrifying, high-stakes standoff. The crucial point here is that for 13 agonizing days, the entire world literally held its breath. We were teetering right on the absolute edge of mutually assured destruction. The sources note how local soldiers were called those days as the loneliest of their lives, just primed to launch nuclear missiles if challenged. Thankfully, President Kennedy and Soviet Premier Khrushchev reached a diplomatic resolution, exchanging weapon withdrawals to pull the world back from the brink. Beyond Cuba, though, the geopolitical chess match just raged on globally. In 1960, a U.S. U-2 spy plane piloted by Francis Gary Powers was dramatically shot down over Soviet airspace. Then in 61, families were suddenly and physically divided when construction began on the 106-kilometer Berlin Wall, complete with a lethal death strip. By 1965, the bitter, complex realities of the Vietnam War were escalating, with U.S. troop levels surging dramatically. And in 68, the brief hope for freedom in Czechoslovakia, known as the Prague Spring, was decisively crushed under Soviet pressure. Shifting our focus from global conflict to domestic progress, this era saw incredible bravery. Everyday citizens fought against enforced segregation and literally put their lives on the line for fundamental human rights. We go from 6-year-old Ruby Bridges being escorted by U.S. Marshals to attend an all-white school in 1960, to the Freedom Riders braving violence on public buses, which all culminated in massive, organized demonstrations for voting rights in Selma by 1965. And right in the middle of that struggle, in August 1963, we get these 4 iconic words. Delivered by Martin Luther King Jr. to a staggering 250,000 activists on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, this speech forever anchored the emotional weight and moral clarity of the civil rights movement. It was a unifying call for nonviolent protest and racial equality that resonated around the entire globe. The legislative climax of those tireless, nonviolent protests arrived in 1964. President Lyndon B. Johnson handed Martin Luther King Jr. the very pen used to sign the monumental Civil Rights Act. This was a massive turning point. It officially outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, fundamentally changing the legal fabric of the United States. And the spirit of massive institutional change wasn't just political either. It reached the Vatican. Pope John XXIII gathered bishops from all over the world for the Second Vatican Council. It was a massive 3-year undertaking that literally changed how the religion sounded, allowing Mass to be spoken in local languages instead of just Latin for the first time in centuries. They were specifically aiming to update and modernize the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church for the modern world. This profound duality really defined the 1960s. On one hand, you had the disciplined, life-or-death struggle of the civil rights marchers, ordinary people walking with grim determination. Right alongside that, you had the counterculture's ultimate free-spirited gathering. In 1969, 500,000 people descended on a farm in New York for Woodstock, creating this utopian explosion of peace, love, and music that defined the hopes of an entire generation. The soundtrack and style of the decade changed just as rapidly as the politics. The youth subculture drove a massive revolution. The contraceptive pill became publicly available in 1960, radically shifting social norms. Chubby Checkers, the twist, became a dance craze so wild it actually caused a spike in spinal injuries. The Beatles absolutely stormed the charts, the revolutionary miniskirt hit the fashion scene, and 1967 brought the massive Summer of Love in San Francisco, drawing over 100,000 people to the hippie movement. However, as we review the era's legacy impartially, we really have to weigh these breathtaking triumphs against a very dark underbelly. We saw Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin become the first man in space, followed by the American moon landing and even the first human heart transplant. But these scientific peaks are forever shadowed by tragic, high-profile assassinations. The murders of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Malcolm X in New York, Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis, and Robert F. Kennedy repeatedly shattered the public's hope. Yet the demand for justice never stopped. Even at the decade's close, activism continued to evolve. In November 1969, a group of Native American activists sailed out to occupy Alcatraz Island in California Bay. They reclaimed it under an 1868 treaty and actually held it for 19 months. It was a bold move that set a powerful precedent for indigenous activism and deeply influenced future federal policy reform. As we wrap up this explainer, I leave you with a thought to ponder. Look at the world around you. The structures, the expanded civil freedoms, the medical and technological marvels, and those stark geopolitical warnings we navigate today, they were all undeniably forged in the fires of this single, explosive decade. It truly was an era unlike any other. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to In 8 Minutes and never miss what matters.